My name is Catherine Lucero, and I'm the Director of the Office of Youth and Community Restoration. I wanted to talk a little bit about October. October is a time for nationwide advocacy and awareness raising, culminating in initiatives that encourage reforms to improve youth outcomes. The recent White House proclamation underscores the importance of our collective efforts and reminds us of our role in championing these changes. It is Nationally Youth Justice Action Month. And through his proclamation issued last week, Governor Newsom acknowledged that California joins the nation in recognizing Youth Justice Action Month and lifting the importance of creating a fair and equitable youth justice system for the future of our state. California has taken significant steps to reform youth incarceration based on research that shows youth involved in the justice system who remain under the care of their local counties are more prepared for their transition back into their community and for achieving their educational, career, and life goals. The purpose of the OYCR Youth Justice Action web series is to provide all juvenile justice stakeholders with information on practices and trends that highlight the shifting landscape of the juvenile justice field to improve outcomes for children, families, youth, and communities. The webinar series is held generally on the first Monday of each month to share best practices and pioneering research that promote a behavioral health approach to youth justice. OYCR was born out of SB 823, and our vision is to envision a healthy California that enables all youth to be responsible, thriving, and engaged members of their communities. Our mission is to promote trauma-responsive, culturally informed, gender-honoring, positive youth justice for all youth involved in the justice system and to support their successful transition into adulthood and welcome them back into their communities. In the past year, we have organized a series of impactful webinars aiming at improving youth justice practices, fostering positive youth development, and enhancing educational opportunities for incarcerated youth. Our goal is to leverage the insights from these discussions to inform our work and drive systemic change. We have been able to educate through our webinar series hundreds of professionals. Let's take a moment to reflect on the past year of insights gained from the Youth Justice Action webinar series by exploring some of the key themes that highlight our collective learning. We had a youth justice ending incarceration of girls and gender expansive youth webinar by the Roca Institute, which showcased strategies for reducing incarceration rates. Richard Mendel and Jessica Ellis led the session on advancing diversion, highlighting California's initiatives aimed at positive youth outcomes. Additionally, there was a session on victims in the justice system led by Lenore Anderson, bringing attention and integrating victim rights within restorative justice frameworks and underscoring areas for improvement in our systems. Education and positive youth development was a significant focus of webinars on education and positive youth development with experts sharing strategies for enhancing educational access and youth engagement. Sessions like high quality education for incarcerated youth and keeping youth at the center featured insights from Susie Rivera, Brandon Stepp, who emphasized the importance of incorporating youth voice in decision-making. Jeffrey Butts discussed the necessity of integrating positive youth development models into the justice system, emphasizing successful practices that promote healthy growth and engagement among youth. Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman explained the intersection of adolescent development and youth justice, guiding us toward more effective interventions based on brain research and sharing insights that were which informed the landmark Supreme Court cases that she spoke about. The Advancing Diversion explored strategies and system reform with sessions addressing critical issues affecting youth of color and their interactions with the justice system. The CalAIM Justice Package and the CYBHI webinars provided vital insights into funding opportunities for community-based organizations, showcasing initiatives for enhanced youth services. and Professor Kristen Henning's discussion on race, adolescence, and the criminalization of youth of color highlighted the pressing need for policy reform to counteract racial disparities and ensure equitable treatment within the justice system. Let's take a look back at some of the highlights from last year through this very short video retrospective.
We are in this new environment of juvenile justice where we no longer have a state detention system for youth. And while we're going through an adjustment period and making sure that systems are in place, it's just an amazing opportunity to really look at how can education play a role in the rehabilitation that's at the core of juvenile justice.
California is the first state in the nation to dedicate higher education dollars for juvenile justice impacted youth. And it really stems from a belief that we share as a network and that the Youth Law Center has shared and that OYCR shares. And it's that every juvenile justice impacted young person not only deserves the right to have access to college, but is fully capable of going through college and pursuing their particular career and academic dreams.
Credible messenger mentoring then is something that is very, while utilizing restorative group practice, also provides intensive support on an individual level, that each young person has their own roadmap that they are creating and with which they're receiving support and some co-navigation as they move through their process.
Rather than there being two distinct groups, there's a tremendous overlap between the life circumstances of people who are most commonly victims of crime and the life circumstances of people who are most commonly committing crime and convicted of committing crime.
Doing diversion for 50 years, and for the last 30 of those years, we've had a restorative justice component, which means the person impacted by the crime is invited into the process for the young person and the impacted party to meet together for the situation to be made right and for everyone to be made whole.
We realized that a lot of times there's youth that are brought before us who, what they're experiencing, they maybe have a lot of things going on at home, a lot of trauma, other issues going on that don't necessarily need the involvement of the juvenile justice system to get them back on track. And so we began looking into options for ways for us to help youth address some of the issues that were bringing them before us without bringing them into our system.
The way that our programming ranges, we start doing with beats and rhymes. It's just where kids want to start most of the time. And in that process, we're earning a trusted relationship.
Had to change my perspective. My tunnel vision led me right into corrections. A blessing that I made it out without a question. But not too many do, so you can say that that's the message. You gotta make a right and just pave a way for your section. You wanna be an artist, start working on your collection.
I direct an initiative really intended to support the well-being of young people across the state. It's called the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. And the goal is really to transform the landscape of behavioral health services that are offered.
Research points to a very significant overrepresentation of youth with mental health disorders that are in our juvenile justice system and foster care systems. And in addition to that, there's also this increasing need for programs that address mental health issues of youth at risk for homelessness.
And why Medicaid is so important to you as juvenile justice stakeholders is every child serving system in California works this way. There's a federal law tied to a state action, but it's administered at the local level. This is true of education, of early childhood, of child welfare, of juvenile justice, of the regional center. Medicaid is the tie that binds these systems together. The way we will transform public education, the way we will decrease reliance on congregate care and foster care, the way we will disrupt the prison pipeline is by healing-centered strategies, and the financier of those strategies are Medicaid.
I feel like every time I join spaces like this, it's always refreshing and a reminder that I am in the right place. I am meeting with the right people, and that this is where we need to be at. You know, like when I see people that are like Susie said, as dynamic as Brandon was, and so concerned with youth voice, with centering youth voice, and with gathering information from us. I think it's very humbling to be part of this effort, because when I was young and I was going through everything I was going through, I didn't know that there was this many people that care. And nowadays, I feel like it's more like, maybe because I'm on the other side of it, I see that I see a lot more people that care. So it's always like very humbling and very rewarding to be in these spaces.
You can find all of our recorded webinars in the resources section of the OYCR website for further exploration and learning. I just want to thank our the web support team that's here today, Tara, Jackie, Scott, and many of the other OYCR staff for this wonderful year of learning. Looking forward, as we celebrate our past achievements, we are excited about what lies ahead. I want to emphasize how our previous topics align perfectly with the exciting legislative changes and broader movement in juvenile justice. Recent legislative changes, for example, AB 2181, has made significant strides in modifying graduation requirements for youth in juvenile court schools. This bill responds to our community's observations that some youth were left without educational program, creating barriers to their future. This change represents a pivotal shift toward equity, ensuring that all youth have a clear path to graduation and beyond. California Youth Justice Summit is coming up in November, and we're looking ahead to November 5th and 6th, where we will continue to build connections, share innovative practices, and commit to further improving our youth justice system. This event will foster collaboration across various disciplines, emphasizing the needs for critical partnerships to support our youth. Don't miss this opportunity to engage with thought leaders and practitioners in the field. Register for the summit. Somebody will be dropping in a link, and secure your spot and be part of the change we want to see in youth justice. Youth scholarships are available. Please reach out to OYCR as instructed in the conference website if you or someone you know would like to apply for a summit scholarship. Future webinar topics will continue to keep pace with innovation and delivering the most relevant and useful information to the field. We invite you to share your thoughts and ideas through the survey about the series. Please click the link in the chat to complete the survey and help us shape further discussions. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to know more about? We are going to have a legislative update in January so that we'll be reviewing all the new laws and all the new case law and statutory law as well in January. Together, we are not just participants in a system, we are catalysts for change, ensuring that every young person has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you for your dedication and commitment to this vital work. Let's continue to work collaboratively towards a bright future for our youth and our communities. Today's webinar, which I will shift to now, is called Healing Through Understanding, Trauma, Brain Science, and Transformation. And it takes us back to our foundational purpose of this work, enhancing our understanding of youth behavior and the strategies we employ to support court-involved youth through a trauma-informed lens. By delving into brain science and the impacts of trauma, we will uncover the underlying factors that shape youth responses and behaviors. This understanding is critical for developing effective interventions that foster healing and transformation as well as accountability. As part of its partnership with UCLA's Luskin School of Social Welfare, OYCR has also recently developed a TA brief focused on trauma-informed care. We will include a link to more information about this resource in our follow-up email after this session, and we've dropped a link there just now. But we will get all these links to you with a follow-up email. It is my great pleasure to introduce Betsy Fox-Tolentino and James J.T. Timpson from the Roca Impact Institute. Betsy is the Managing Director of the Juvenile and Young Adult Justice Initiatives. In this role, Betsy leads efforts to scale justice projects through strategic partnership, both regionally and nationally. With 18 years of experience in the criminal justice and juvenile justice advocacy, Betsy has focused on policy development and creating systems that meet the diverse needs of our communities. Betsy is also a strong advocate for Rewire CBT, believing it builds on existing strategies, supports justice system staff, and drives positive behavior change to reduce violence in communities. JT serves as the Managing Director of Community Violence Initiatives at the Roca Impact Institute. James brings over 20 years of experience in violence intervention and leadership. He was instrumental in the expansion of Roca Baltimore as its founding director, and today he oversees the scaling of Rewire CBT across the country as a tool for behavior and systems change. In addition to his work at Roca, JT serves on various advisory boards, including the Baltimore Mayor's Cabinet for Boys and Young Men of Color and the Johns Hopkins Innovation Fund. He has been recognized nationally for his work in gun violence prevention. Please join me in welcoming both Betsy and JT as our speakers for today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Lucero. We're so happy to be here today, and thanks to the entire webinar team for organizing all this and inviting us to be with you all today. I'm just going to need a brief pause while I share my screen. So bear with me for one moment. And get set up. There we go. We should be all good. Are we seeing the right thing? JT, yes? All right. I like the thumbs up just to make sure we're all seeing what we're supposed to be seeing. Again, thank you for having us today. We're so excited to talk to you all about the work that we do and how it can support the work that you're doing with the realignment and changes and system reforms. And as your landscapes shift and as you are through your work trying to meet the diverse and ever-changing needs of the young people you serve, it is incredibly important to understand the role that trauma plays in the cycle of violence, how trauma impacts behaviors that we may see in young people, and how the impact of trauma can form how we build readiness to support change. Today, JT and I are going to share how sort of our understanding of brain science and the impact of trauma has informed on the development of our core foundational strategy of Rewire CBT as a way to help young people heal from trauma and change their behaviors. At the same time, we see Rewire CBT and understanding brain science and trauma as a strategy to also help frontline workers really understand why young people show up the way they do sometimes, and sometimes why we as practitioners show up into the work the way we do. We understand that these strategies can help manage our own cycles, and we can help young people identify their cycles and see the possibility of being able to do something different. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to JT to talk a little bit about Roca, and then we'll jump into the brain science, some work around trauma. While we go through the webinar today, we'll have little pauses, sort of checks for understanding at the end of sort of each section. And that's an opportunity where we're just going to go over some of the stuff that we talked about, but also if you have questions on that section, throw it into the chat and we can take a pause and answer those questions as we go along. All right, and with that, over to you, JT.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? I guess I was muted. Thanks, Betsy. So this is our motto, right? This is our mission and who we are, to be a relentless force in disrupting incarceration, poverty, and racism by engaging young adults, police, and systems at the center of urban violence and relationship to address trauma, find hope, drive change. A lot of words, right? Sounds beautiful. Beautiful mission statement. I love beautiful statements. But if we really focus on what it really means, we are really relentless in the way that we go after our young people because we know that they deserve the opportunity and they need the opportunity. And when we think about who we serve highest risk, the highest risk population, meaning that our young people aren't standing at the front door waiting for us to show up with smiles on their faces. They usually are ducking us and running away from us and hiding from us, and we have to go get them and find them to be able to offer them this life-changing opportunity. But it's not always up to just our young people. Sometimes we have to think about the way that they engage with systems. Now, our systems actually are designed sometimes that don't actually have the best interests of our young people in mind. And so we engage systems around changing the way that they think and the way that they operate that actually doesn't have the best interests of our young people in mind. So we hold systems as responsible for helping drive this change as much as we hold young people responsible for changing. And then we have to work together. It's really about finding a way to work together, because when we learn to work together, that's the only way that we can really change what we see. We can only really change the trauma or help heal some of this trauma and really find that hope and be able to drive the change that we're looking for. You can go ahead. So this is the demographic of who we serve. Specifically, I worked out at the Baltimore site. As mentioned, I was the founder director of the Baltimore site when it first came to Baltimore about 5, 6 years ago now. And this is who we targeted. We were targeting young men, 16 to 24 years old, involved in criminal justice system, no high school diploma, or even if they do have high school diplomas, it's low literacy. A lot of kids make it through the school system, but when you test them, they're not reading at the level that they're not reading at a proficient level. Most of our young men, when we got them, were reading around a 3rd grade level, even though a lot of them had high school diplomas. Involved in gangs, guns, drugs, failed out of programs, schools, jobs, and maybe young parents. Another caveat to add to this is in Baltimore, probably about 80% or so of our young people have actually been shot before we get them. So they've already been shot at least one time before we have engaged them or get them into the program. But that's just a demographic. In Massachusetts, we have 7 sites, 5 in Massachusetts, the one I just mentioned in Baltimore, and then we have a women's only site in Hartford, Connecticut. So some of our other sites in Massachusetts have both men and women. But again, in Baltimore's only men's, Hartford, Connecticut's only women. Our main site in Massachusetts does serve both men and young women. And this is how our model is structured. I already talked a little bit about the relentless piece. It's not a mandated program. We're a voluntary program in most cases. So in most cases, we're getting your information, and it's up to us to find you and engage you in the program. So again, in Baltimore, that takes an average of about 15 to 18 door knocks. That means that we're going to somebody's house that many times before we're actually catching up with that young person. And the reason for us going that hard is really because we want them to know that we're serious about finding them. Yeah, we annoy a lot of people by knocking on their doors that many times, but so what? That's the beauty of it. You need to be annoyed. Wake up. Let us get to that young person. We're looking for your young person so we can help them. So we're going to knock on your door relentlessly until you deliver them to us. When that model was first presented to me, I told my boss, "You're crazy. No way we're going to knock on people's doors in Baltimore over and over again and think that we're going to be safe." And she said, "No, you got to trust the model. You got to trust the process. The trust in the process, that's actually what's gotten us through to a lot of our young people, is the way that we relentlessly go after them. We have a particular group of staff that have the skills to be able to do that. They can find young people and they know how to engage them when they get to them. That first month, that first period, that first stage of the model is really about building that relationship, because we know that young people change more in terms of relationship than they do a consequence. So we try to help really build a healthy, positive relationship with them. We're not asking them for much. We're offering a whole lot in the beginning because we want them to be able to take advantage of these services in an authentic way. The second part is really the crux, though. This is where it really comes. This is where the meat and potato is where the CBT happens, right? And our form of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral theory, for those of you who don't know what CBT means, cognitive behavioral theory is the clinical term. Ours is non-clinical. It's cognitive behavioral theory because we designed it to be taught specifically by frontline workers, those who have the most contact with young people when they meet them. So ours is a mobile form of CBT that we take to the streets. And this is really where we get the most bang for our buck with how we deal with young people. This is where the most change happens because we're constantly using the CBT. The thing I love about it the most is that it is a tool that can be used in any situations, crisis, non-crisis situations. But a lot of times when we're dealing with our young people on the street, they're in crisis mode. So it's a beautiful opportunity for us to be able to use the tool on the front end to help them manage the crisis, and then get an opportunity to go back on the back end and follow up with them to help them really understand what we help them do, how we help them manage that crisis, so we can really teach them the skill in a more formal way. And Betsy, we're going to touch on that a little bit more later as we go into it. I think Betsy's going to touch on it a little bit, or maybe I am later, but I know we're going to get to it a little bit more. The third part is really about how do we help them practice this CBT, or how do we help them practice this behavior change? So for us, we have a social enterprise where we actually pay them to go to work. We pay them minimum wage. They work 26 to 30 hours a week. And it's really a practice ground. Our goal is to fire them as many times. I want to get you on my work crew so I can fire you as many times as I possibly can, because I want to challenge all those negative workplace behaviors. I want to challenge all those things that are going to show up when I'm not around. But I'd rather them show up while I have you with me, and I can control your hiring and firing than when you go out and it's in somebody else's hands. So we fire them for different workplace behaviors. We then enhance that skill, and we bring them back onto the work crew. So it is an opportunity for them to learn, practice, and really go through some change. We look for really about 18 months of consistent employment with us before we really feel comfortable sending them out to outside employment. So we really want them to practice with us, practice in that. It's less about the work and more about practice. Show up on time, be in your uniform, learn proper workplace etiquette, learn how to talk to the supervisor, learn how to deal with your coworkers, learn all these different workplace skills, learn how to follow directions, just simple workforce readiness skills that will help them later down the road. We assume a lot of young people need jobs. That's what I hear all the time. Let's get them jobs. They need jobs. They need jobs. The worst thing you can do for a young person is send them to a job when they're not ready. That is more harmful than anything you could ever do thinking that you're being helpful. Do not send young people to jobs when they're not ready, because it will damage them and traumatize them more and delay their entry into the workforce in the future. Because when they get treated that way, when they're not ready, they don't understand it, and the trauma impacts the way that they think about work in the future. So please, let's put time into preparing our young people before we just keep sending them to work. Then the last piece is about the engaged institutions and the systems. Again, I talked a little bit about that. We work collaboratively with a lot of partners to really implement this change that we want to see in young people. Most importantly, one of the partners we work with is law enforcement, because they have the most contact with our young people on a daily basis if our young people are high risk. But we ask for opportunities of law enforcement to work with them where there are opportunities for us to step in and intervene in things that are not arrestable. Please allow us to work with the young person so that you don't have to continue to arrest them and they right back out on the street, right? Help us work with you to help them promote that behavior change so that we all are safer at the end of the day and we all don't have to keep dealing with those same issues over and over again. So what that looks like is, officer may pull a young person up on the corner. They may be doing something. He doesn't have to arrest them for it, but he can give us a call and tell us to come deal with him. And we'll come handle and deal with that situation and try to help, help that young person understand things a little bit differently or see it differently. Or sometimes it's helping the officer understand or see things differently. But that joint collaboration is really vital around the work. And a lot of the work that Betsy side of the house does with juvenile justice reform and helping other juvenile justice systems really look at the way that they handle and deal with our young people. Again, she'll talk more about that, but that's also a part of our engaged institutions and systems work. So that was our direct service side. That's what we do on direct service. Now on the institute side, we developed the institute because we didn't want to replicate that direct service side across the country. What we knew is that we had tools, and we had tools that could help people work within the framework of dealing with high-risk young people across the country, no matter what it looks like. We can help you implement these tools into whatever models or whatever frameworks you design to really help you be able to promote that behavior change or address the trauma that we're seeing pop up in a lot of our young people across the country, right? So we developed the Impact Institute, and it's really about our training, implementation, training, coaching, program design, development, really about helping you. The one thing I love about the Impact Institute is we're not a train and leave. right? We're trained and really try to help people institute what we've trained in into what it is you're trying to do. So we come in with the tool, but it's really about how you tell us you want it to fit. And we help figure out how it fits, where it fits best. We help think about ways to be innovative about making it fit or helping it fit. And it's really that CBT tool that's helped driving that change. And the coaching that we offer is really helping coaches and supervisors really understand how to use CBT, supervising your staff. What should you be looking for? How should you be thinking about? How do you integrate it into staff culture? Right? All these different things around supervision is part of what we do as part of the CBT training that we offer. Betsy, did I miss anything here? Good. All right. So today, the key concepts are really talking about understanding how, in order to prevent or reduce violence, we must understand brain science. And this is the craziest thing to me because I worked the front lines for about 20 years in Baltimore, and brain science, what? I went off of my street science. I didn't need brain science. I was like, oh, no. When I first heard about brain science, I'm like, what is this and why are they trying to make me understand brain science? I just didn't get it until I got it. Because inside of the science helps us understand human behavior so much that it's so critical to understand the effects or why trauma looks and shows up the way that it does. Why the behaviors of our young people and people who are highly traumatized look the way that they do. Why it's better for us to design our programs around stages of change and thinking about different theories as we design our programs around brain science, because it tells us a lot, right? Understanding trauma impacts on our behaviors and understanding the fact that we are not our behaviors. Understanding that change is possible, which is the process of neuroplasticity. And then again, like I talked about cognitive behavioral theory, which is really the foundation of what we do as far as the behavior change and supporting behavior change for young people and people who are highly traumatized.
All right, just took me a minute to find that mute button. So, as JT mentioned, why does it matter? Why do we need to worry about the brain science? Why do we need to talk about it? Why do we need, as practitioners and frontline staff, understand it? But when we understand the brain science and the impact of trauma, we can actually find different and more meaningful, effective ways to show up for the young people that we serve, help them support their change, and ultimately reduce violence in our communities. So the brain's main purpose is survival, right? The brain is all about keeping us alive. It is really trying its best at all times to protect you the way it best knows. And it can be because of three important things our brain does for us. One, our brain is the control center of our body and is geared to scan for threats and danger. And then it uses mental shortcuts to help us make sense of the world around us. So these three things: our brain is the control center. It is doing everything it can to keep us safe. And part of that is always scanning for threats and creating those mental shortcuts. So let's dig into the control center a little bit. Our brain is that control center for our body. Every thought, every feeling, and every action is what allows us to plan, feel things, and store and recall memories. It's really what makes us human. It's what we all share. We all have a control center. And remember, the brain's main purpose is survival and is always working for us, processing information quicker than we're even able to understand, and controlling the rest of our body to do everything it can to keep us alive. The first part of the brain to develop is that part that is responsible for keeping us alive, the brainstem, also known as the survival brain. This part is responsible for all the care functions that help keep us alive. Those basic things that, like breathing, swallowing, like our heartbeat. We're not there saying, heart, beat now, or don't forget to breathe, everybody. We gotta keep ourselves alive. Our brain is automatically doing that for us to keep us alive and keep us going. The next part of the brain to develop is sort of that middle part, or we like to call it our emotional brain. And that part is assessing threats and danger and priming our body to respond. Again, our brain is processing tons of information every second, more than we can even understand. And those mental shortcuts that it creates become very, very critical. The last part of our brain to develop is that top brain. And you'll hear us talk about the bottom brain and the top brain and the middle brain. We keep it simple, although this is an incredibly complex place of science. But we can really understand the main core concepts in a very simple way to help us be a little more informed on why young people do what they do sometimes, and also why we do what we do sometimes. But that top brain, last thing to come online, and it is responsible for our logic, our will, our reasoning, our language, and awareness. And as most of you probably know, brains don't fully develop until we're 26. So why do we care about all this? Our brain is constantly working to keep us safe. Everything we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, perceive is received through our emotional brain, which communicates rapidly to the top or the bottom brain. This is where we start to figure out, is something that we are seeing, feeling, touching, or experiencing is something that may not keep us alive, may threaten our ability to survive. And we may get kicked right into that survival brain and set our body in motion for fight, flight, or freeze. And it uses mental shortcuts because there's so much coming in to help determine the risk of every situation. So again, we got top brain is our thinking brain, that bottom brain is our survival brain. And the thing is, we are geared and always scanning for threats all the time. And our bodies are primed to respond quickly in that fight, flight, or freeze mode when we do detect a threat. As our brains scan for threats, real or perceived, it stores information based on how certain events have made us feel in the past. If something happened that scared or hurt us, made us angry, our brain works hard to help us avoid that from happening again. The key thing is we are always scanning, and sometimes we're scanning real threats, and sometimes we pick up perceived threats. For example, in the slide here, you're seeing a snake. If I see a snake and I am going straight in to fight, flight, or freeze mode. But sometimes that snake isn't always a snake. Sometimes it may just be a cord on the ground in the dark. And I've used sort of my mental shortcuts that when I see something that looks like a snake, even though that is just, it's not a real threat, it's a perceived threat, I can automatically be pushed into that survival brain, that reaction of fight, flight, or freeze. These shortcuts that we make help become our automated ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. And a lot of times they are helpful for us. Sometimes it's, if I see a snake as I'm walking through the woods and I see that, I jump out of the way, incredibly helpful. But sometimes they're not helpful for us. And sometimes they influence on how we perceive a situation. Our brain knows its history, and since it's our primary purpose of survival, it does whatever it needs to keep us safe. It's creating stories about our current moment and future predictions based on past information. That info sometimes was really useful in our life in the past, but sometimes that info may not be as helpful as we respond to things in the present moment. So let's all give this a try. All right, on your screen, you should be seeing a path with a bike, sort of just in the middle of the path there. I want you to use the chat function and just type in what it immediately pops into your head. Do you feel a certain way when you look at this image, and what does it make you want to do? So just your immediate thoughts, just go ahead and throw it into the chat. I'll give you a minute to do that. I see someone say run for your life. I see accident. I see someone crashed. Maybe someone's injured. Someone's feeling giving up. Someone thinks kidnapping. Someone's worried if the person riding the bike is okay. They're like, where are they? looking around to see if anyone's there. Someone's thinking bear. JT, what comes to your mind?
Trouble, trouble, trouble.
I've got stolen bike here. The thing is here, we all have our own mental shortcuts based on our past experiences and situations we've been in. My mental shortcut is not the same as your mental shortcut. So we have to understand that all of us are going to perceive situations, how our brain scans through for those threats very differently. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that as we are in situations, I might think of it one way, you might think of it at another. But again, we come to it in our automated way, that very beginning sort of initial thought. And you can even think about how it makes you feel. Like when I see this picture, it almost gives me like the gut punch, like the immediate sort of anxiety. Someone may just feel angry because that bike got left in a place where they're trying to walk. But it all makes us feel a certain way. And that's when we start to really understand where those automated reactions are coming from. And sometimes how we get kicked into survival brain. So I'm going to turn it over to JT to talk a little bit more about the survival brain and how we know we're in it and what it's like.
Yeah, so a lot of times the key for us is when it's triggers, like we all have these physical responses or we all have these physical things that happen physically, right? What we try to teach in our course or teach our young people when this happens is being able to identify what you're actually feeling. Like, what does it feel like? Because a lot of times they get kicked into this over and over again. That alarm bell just rings. It's like threat, 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 right? Because they feel disrespected. They feel like they're not in control. They feel like nobody's listening. Somebody looked at them wrong. Somebody threatened them. They're afraid, right? It's a lot of different reasons that kick us into bottom brain. But the point is that we have these feelings in our body when our top brain actually goes offline. Like adrenaline is released, we increase blood, the pressure, our muscles feel tense, dry mouth. Like all these different things happen because that alarm bell is going off and we're kicked into survival brain. And it's normal. It's normal. That's the key. The key is that it's normal because it happens to all of us. So I just talked about it. What does it feel like when you get kicked into that survival brain, right? What does it look like when your young people get kicked into survival brain? And I'm just asking, if we're asking these questions, you can feel free to dump it in the chat, right? But we know that this is what actually happens. We know that there are certain things that happen when people get kicked into survival mode. And I would not be surprised if a lot of those behaviors look the same for a lot of us. A lot of the behaviors that we see with our young people would probably look a lot alike. So here's the thing we're going to test a little bit, right? To see kind of where we are. Oftentimes when we think about triggers or things that trigger us into survival brain, some of them are experiences that we often experience on a day-to-day basis, right? Things that we actually go through. You feeling disrespected by a young person. Can somebody tell me whether that would trigger you high, medium, low, or not triggered? Supervisor judging you, not feeling in control of a situation. But I just want everybody to pause for a minute and take a look at this list, right? I want somebody to take a look at this list. And then I'm going to ask somebody to identify one thing that's a high trigger for you. One thing that might be a high trigger. I think we can only use the chat function, right? So just put it in the chat. One thing that might be a high trigger for you.
Staff not doing
their job.
Yep.
Yep. Being ignored by staff, losing control of a situation, yelling, loud noises, rapid movements. Thinking you are losing control of a situation. Yes. Yelling, yelling, feeling powerless. Staff unkind or disrespectful toward the child, right? Like these are all things that might trigger us into our bottom brain or our survival brain. The difference is how we manage to handle those things or what our responses to those things are. hopefully most of us, we all, like I said, we all get kicked into survival brain, so it's normal. Staff not doing their job. We all get kicked into survival brain. It's normal. Because a lot of these situations we all experience and we get annoyed by them. But some of them we don't, because some of them just don't trigger us that way. The point is that we all have survival brain. We all have something that will kick us into high, medium, or low. We all have things that won't trigger us at all. But we have learned how to manage those situations where our behaviors may look in line or they may look out of line. It just depends on the situation and depends on what actually happens. The point is for us to realize that we are the same. We all the same. We all have this survival brain and we all get triggered into it. I'm sure some people were probably reading this and got triggered. You got triggered just reading some of these things up here, right? Because it's natural and it's going to happen. Yeah, see? Because it's natural and it's going to happen. But what we want people to understand is like when you get triggered, what does that feel like in your body? And what's the intensity, right? I couldn't just pick one. I might just feel a little annoyed or I could be enraged, right? Understanding that your feelings and your feelings and range from intensity. Your triggers could be low, they could be high. The point for the trauma piece or the behavior change piece is we like people to be able to identify what you're feeling in your body when these things are happening. So what happens is when you can identify that feeling in your body, when it happens, it automatically slows you down because it tells you something's happening. Oh man, I know when I sweat a lot, that usually means I'm upset. But when I get this feeling, it usually means, and I'm saying usually because it's not always. It doesn't mean that feeling always means the same thing. But whether it means something good or bad, the point is that it got you to slow down enough to consider whether it was good or bad. Am I having this feeling because of something good or whether I'm having this feeling because of something bad? Right? The point is that you identify or recognize that you're having that feeling and you know what it feels like in your body. So this is just one of the exercises that we do to help people understand, like we all have this survival brain. We usually do it in groups and let people kind of discuss it and talk about what it feels like. But this is just a quick glimpse at it. And these are the questions that we would normally ask as the follow-up. We ask people what were your 2 top triggers and what helps you when you get triggered. Maybe somebody wants to share that in the chat. You don't have to share 2, but we already shared our triggers, some of our triggers. So what helps you when you get triggered? Right? And then what does it make you think about how we work with young people? Breathe, right? Teaching all these techniques to our young people are important because we know things that work for us are like to slow down. Right, but we have to teach them sometimes how to slow down because when trauma hit and you're highly emotional, hard to slow down, hard to breathe. It's hard to do all the things that we have learned how to do for ourselves to actually get us to slow down. So what we want to teach young people how to do is to be able to identify these things when they feel them so that they can have that pause. CBT is really about how do we teach young people to take an 8 to 12 second pause to really consider what they're thinking, feeling before they act. Right? Or whatever order it goes in. But we want them to consider that relationship and think about how their feelings and their thoughts affect their actions.
I also love this.
Sometimes they really find a moment to find ourselves. That is the hardest thing. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Betsy.
Sorry, I thought you paused, and I think I just missed a little bit what you're saying. But I was just going to say, I love this exercise in a way because it helps remind us, like, there are things that trigger us, right? That we get triggered. We know what they are. We know what we can do sometimes to help manage our reactions to them. But it also sort of reminds us that young people get triggered sometimes by the exact same things and sometimes by a whole host of other things. And we have to remember that they may not have all the tools yet to be able to manage those reactions. That sometimes, hearing no, telling them put the cell phone down, having to come into the office and see you, having to see you in the community. These can all, given their past circumstances, situations, and traumas, can potentially be a trigger. And that's where we have to be aware of where our young people sometimes sit on these lists. And it's also really great we do this with ourselves to check ourselves a little bit, but also you can do this with the young people you work with to help them figure out what really puts me on the high end of my list and what is like a little trigger, helps get them recentered a little bit. So we're going to jump into
Now,
some
last
text.
I just want to address the last comment that was made about parents, about the parents and the environment that you have to send the young people back home to. Like that is very crucial. That is very critical. That is why we try to teach them these skills. We try to teach them these skills because we know a lot of times that they're good when they with us, but then they got to go back to that jungle, right? And they got to survive in that jungle. And so we try to help them as best we can build these skills because they're facing these situations daily, which is one of the reasons why it's important for us to respond in crisis mode. Because if we give them this tool, they go home and attempt to use it, crisis happens, and we're not there to help them learn how to use it in that crisis. Sometimes they miss the teaching. And it's not that we can be there all the time. So I understand that. But what I'm saying is that when we can, we try to help teach them in that crisis moment so that when they are not with us and they do have to go back in those tough situations, the trauma, everything else is still going to be there. But hopefully we hope that their ability to manage it becomes greater each time so that we can, until we can change that situation, until we can make that situation better.
Awesome. We're going to jump into a quick check for understanding. If you have any questions, this is a great place to throw them into the chat about this section on brain science and the survival brain. So this is a little self-learning here. You can check yourself, but the brain's primary purpose is, give you all a minute, survival. The brain is constantly scanning for, yes, I see lots of bees, threats and danger. Awesome. In order to help us manage info and inform what is happening in the moment, the brain, you all are pros. It creates mental shortcuts. When a threat is perceived, the survival brain kicks in. It's normal. True or false? True. I see lots of A's. All right. Fight, flight, or freeze is a choice we make in the moment. True or false? All right, I'm seeing a little mix here. So we have to remember, fight, flight, or freeze is an automated full body response. It's not a choice we're making in the moment. Our body, remember, our brain is scanning for that threat. It's relying on that mental shortcut, and it's kicking us right into an automated response of fight, flight, or freeze. When we are in our bottom survival brain, our top thinking brain is offline. True or false? True. When our survival brain takes over, it is taking over. It is priming our bodies to activate. And although our top thinking brain will come online, it takes a little longer. Our brain can really drop into that survival mode, and our bodies can activate much faster than our brains sort of process the information and send it up to our thinking brain. All right, y'all did very good on your check for understanding. Any questions? I see that there is a fourth choice now, fawn. Absolutely. And that is something that we'll bring up a lot of times in our training. We try to keep it as simple, like, this fight, flight, or freeze moment, but also fawn is sort of that, like, I'm just going to get away and do nothing. Like, I'm just going to get myself out of this space. So that is another sort of automated response that can occur based on, you mentioned here, your cultural situations, traumas that you may have experienced that may become your automated response. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to JT to talk about trauma.
All right. So when we think about trauma, first we talk about what is it? That extreme stress that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. The individual's experience of a threat to life, bodily integrity, or sanity. My favorite one, the normal response to an abnormal event that results in a disruption of the equilibrium. A lot of times in my experience growing up, I was taught that I was the abnormal one. I was never taught that my experience was what was abnormal and not me. I was always left to believe that I was abnormal because of the way that I responded to an actual abnormal experience. So my response was actually normal. It's the event or the experience that I went through that was actually abnormal. And a lot of times we aren't taught that way as far as traumatic responses, so we blame ourselves for a lot. Go to the next one. So these are the different types of trauma that we talk about, and I'm sure even a lot of us, even as just everyday average citizens, these are things that we suffer on a daily basis, or some of us have suffered. Acute trauma, a single stressful event or dangerous event. Some people are preparing for this right now. We talk about storms and we talk about weather and we talk about all these different types of things. That's stressful to have to prepare for these type of events. That's trauma. That's traumatic, right? Chronic trauma, repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. A lot of people have been through that. And then complex trauma results from exposure to multiple traumatic events. I feel comfortable saying that a lot of us on this call have experienced multiple levels of trauma that probably equal, you're fine, you go forward, that equal add up to the complex trauma, right? Because when we look at this list here about the types of things that cause us to experience trauma, there are a lot of things on here that we can actually identify with, right? We can identify with a lot of different things on this list. And there's some things that we can identify greater than others, but it's a personal experience. Trauma is a personal experience with a lot of people in the association with the event. I can tell you that I've been traumatized by a lot of different things on this list, but they may not be your experiences with those things. But you have things on this list that you've been traumatized by, and may not be my experience, right? The point is that there are all types of things or types of events that actually traumatize us and keep us stuck. So, understanding trauma. Trauma is the fear that won't turn off, is how we define it, right? But consider the psychological burden of living in fear every day, feeling like you're in a state of flight, fight, or freeze, and are seeking safety every waking moment of the day. Dr. Alicia Morning Capuya. Think about that. The psychological burden of living in fear every day, feeling like you are in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and are seeking safety every waking moment of the day. I know a lot of us know what that feels like. For me, I didn't view it the same way, though. I didn't view it as I was seeking safety, or I was fight, flight, or freezing. I was just doing what I do every day. Just living life the way that I live it, the way that I was taught to live, the things that I observed, the things that I understood. Dealing with certain traumatic situations the same way that I've been taught to deal with it, seeing a dead body and just saying, dang, how many times they shoot him? Instead of realizing that that's not normal to see dead bodies that young, right? Or to be stepping over dead bodies, or to be just even experiencing that or exposed to that at that young age, right? We normalize a lot of these things, so we don't associate it with the fear. We don't associate it with the fight, flight, or freeze. We associate it with growing up in the hood, right? It's just the way I grew up. So a lot of these things we have been conditioned to accept a certain way. But it's because the trauma as our trauma and the trauma of the generations of the people before that were raising us, right? So we have to think about that. You go to the next one. When we think about how trauma traps us, though, right? Because I often think about a lot of the ways that I used to think about certain situations. When you're out on the street, everything and everybody is a threat. I don't care who you are. I was always taught to keep my head on the swivel no matter who you are. Trust no one. These are the things that we are taught that trap us inside of our own personal trauma sometimes, or our environmental trauma, or the things that the way that we have been taught to respond, that again, look abnormal to people, but it's not. What we were taught, the way we socialize this stuff is what's abnormal. It's not what's happening to us is what's abnormal, not our responses to it. So we think about it like this: everything's a situation. Everyone is out to get me. I'm not safe. I've experienced these exact feelings a whole lot in my life, right? What did I fear? What did I feel? I felt anxious. I felt fearful. I was stressed out. Most of those feelings are things that I would have never admitted. Will never admit I'm afraid. Never gonna admit that you're stressing me out. My actions are probably gonna show that I'm anxious though. My actions may show that I'm fearful. Right? So what do? I'm gonna make a choice. I'm gonna do one of these automatically. I'm gonna fight, flight, or freeze. Because I feel threatened. My alarm bell goes off. I'm gonna choose one. And what the behavior is going to look like is probably associated to the trauma that I've impacted by throughout my life. Because trauma is that fear that won't turn off. It keeps us in a hypersensitivity. It keeps us hypervigilant. It keeps us hyper everything. We just overstimulate it. So we have to help people to deal and treat that trauma so that they can slow down and really make rational decisions based on, whatever we can help them understand. Go ahead, Betsy. So the important piece is here, right? Because this is a lot of time what happens. Trauma in a person decontextualized over time looks like a personality. Trauma in family traits decontextualized over time. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time looks like family traits. Trauma in people decontextualized over time looks like culture. This is the biggest sin that's been committed against humanity is the decontextualization of trauma. Because then it causes us to look at young black boys and young black kids in neighborhoods as animals, as savages, as thugs, as all these different labels because we're taking away the context, right? They didn't ask to grow up the way that they grow up. A lot of them didn't ask to be in the situations that they're in. A lot of black and brown kids, or even just kids across America that live in these urban communities, black, brown, white, and different, didn't ask for it. And we treat them a lot of times as if they asked to be put in these situations and have been asked, or they chose to make these decisions. A lot of times it's because we want to decontextualize what has really happened to them. And the decontextualization is a huge systematic failure. Because a lot of times systems continue to get away with what they get away with, the treatment of our young people, because of decontextualization. If we take away what's important, it makes it easy to make the decisions that we make around people. That's not the way that we should be looking at it. Make sure we keep the context in things, because we have to understand that if a kid views himself negatively, he's not going to care about you. If I don't care about me, why should I care about you? If I have no control over my environment, how safe do you actually think I feel? Stop giving me medicine for ADHD. I don't have ADHD. My problem with attention is because I live in a food desert and I don't have access to a healthy diet. So I eat sugar all day, every day, which causes me to look like I have ADHD when I sit in the classroom, but I don't. I just have a bad diet. Because all I ate this morning was a honey bun and a donut and drank a little Huggy on the way to school. That's full of sugar, right? And a lot of our kids are left alone to get up, get their little brothers up, get their little sisters up. Couple dollars on the table for y'all to go to the corner store and grab breakfast, or what they call breakfast, on your way to school. It can't continue to work that way. It makes it too easy for us to put the blame on our children, right? Managing emotions. Who can manage their emotions through that? Who can manage their emotions through a lot of what they deal with daily? Challenges with relationship and trust. Everybody has failed me. Why should I trust anybody? Systems, people I love, people who said they love me, people who said they were here to take care of me, people who promised me, people who this, that, and the third. Everybody failed me. Why should I trust anybody? Right? So we have to think about all these behaviors that we see and understand that context plays a huge role in these behaviors. Because at the end of the day, we are not our behaviors. If I committed the act of murder, I'm not a murderer. I committed the act of murder, which is an egregious sin, crime, however you want to frame it. But please don't label me, because you don't understand the circumstances or understand what decision I may have had to make. This is not about excusing accountability, so do not hear me wrong. I'm not saying accountability is not attached to this. What I'm saying is that even through accountability, there's still a lens for trauma or a lens for understanding trauma, which causes people's behaviors to look a certain way, right? And a lot of times those ways are unacceptable to us. So we have to understand the relationship between trauma and the behaviors that we see instead of labeling people as that behavior. Because the solution is not found in the behavior, the solution is found in the trauma. We find the solution in the trauma. Addressing the trauma is addressing the behavior long term. All right, so when we think about trauma, Betsy, I'm sorry, my screen, I can't see the left side. I can only see the right side.
You want me to help you out?
Yeah, you can read the right. You can read the left side. I can read the right, but go with the first one.
All right. So impact. So when we're trying to understand the impact of trauma and what we see, we have to remember that trauma changes the way the brain physically develops and functions. So what can we do different?
So when we think about what we're doing different, it's really about creating safety so that people can get to that top brain. Creating safety means that we have to address the trauma because people will only start to feel safe as their trauma starts to heal. And we talk about that by using our CBT, our Rewire CBT, because our Rewire CBT is the tool that we use, but it's repetitive and it takes a while. So we have to make sure that we're practicing and that we're repeating because this is really about skill development.
Traumatic responses can easily be triggered by a look, a sound, smell, thought, or touch, and drive reactive behaviors. So what do we need to do?
This is about understanding how we show up sometimes, right? A lot of times our trauma gets in the way of how we're able to perform our jobs or how we show up for other people. So managing our own behaviors is critical. Understanding what could trigger us or that we could be triggered. Don't take things personally and understand that they might need a little more room. This is hard though, because when I was on the front line of working in the streets, like respect and all that goes a long way. You're not going to come and get in my face or do certain things to me out there, right? I got to maintain a certain image. All I got is my respect. All I got is this. Until I learned, like, I can't take this stuff personal. You know what I mean? I can't be taking this personal. I know what I could do to him, but he don't know, and it's not his job to know because I shouldn't be thinking like that anyway. So a lot of my approach to frontline work over the years has been me having to transform myself and transform the way that I think about it and understand, like, this ain't about me. Why am I making this work about me? It's about the young people I'm working with. It has nothing to do with me, right? And so get yourself out the way. And then lastly, unaddressed trauma increases the risk of, what is that?
Of aggression and violence.
I got it. I got that one. And finding meaningful and effective ways to support healing, behavior change to reduce violence, right? This is what we talk about through CBT and understanding that we have tools and we have strategies that we can help use to help heal that trauma and help support healing or support healing of the trauma and reduce violence by actually seeing some type of sustained behavior change in the population that we're working with. And then as far as when it comes to how we actually move about it or how we actually do it, really CBT again is about us being able to help people move into this space where they can create the safety for themselves, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Because as the trauma heals, you will find more spaces of safety to create for yourself. Because everything doesn't automatically become the same level of threat that it has been. For me, I consider myself on the road to trauma recovery, but a lot of things are still a threat to me consistently, constantly. No matter what I do or no matter how I think about it, it's still some deprogramming or still some healing that has to be done. Because we incur more trauma as we actually do the work too. So we have to remember to kind of manage that. We got to manage that for ourselves, right? It's about the practice and repeat and understanding that it takes time, right? It's a skill building process. So we have to be able to build skills, right? And the tool is CBT, and we have to practice that tool. Again, it's each one teach one. And then lastly, give space and grace. More time to think, extra self-help regulating, and a little more space, right? It's about don't be so hard on yourself and don't be so hard on the young people when it doesn't look the way we want it to look. We have to understand the trauma recovery lens and what that really means. And this is totally different from the way I used to talk, right? Because coming from the streets, it's like, bro, we ain't got no time for this soft stuff, right? This all is that soft stuff. I was taught all this stuff was soft. This was weak stuff. All this, man, we ain't considering no trauma, man. Look, you do what you're supposed to do, point blank, period. No questions asked, done. You can't do it, step out the way or you get dealt with. Simple as that. This has to allow us to take a much more humanistic lens. Like for the first time, I understand feelings and emotions of people that I just never understood before, because for the first time in my life, I understand my own. And that's a huge difference, because I can label my feelings or I can label my own feelings. I can help other people identify their feelings or understand when other people are caught in their feelings. Right? So it's about just really understanding this whole process of how we get to this place where we're creating this physical, mental, and emotional safety.
All right, so we're at our next sort of check for understanding and pause in case you have any questions about this past section. But we have to remember, as JT talked about, trauma is that fear that doesn't turn off. It's always on, and it can impact the way the brain develops, how it functions, and how we respond, how our behaviors show up. But we're more than our behaviors. But when working with young people, we have to create safety, physically, emotionally, so that we can help them build skills. And we need, as practitioners, to stay in it with them as they process and practice the skills that they're learning. And I'll pause for a minute. If you have any questions, you can throw it in the chat. There was one comment, JT, I saw, we try to put people in a box to understand them, but we don't take time to truly get to know a person, which made me think of often how you bring up, sometimes we look at a young person, their behaviors, and we're like, why are they doing that? Why are they acting so crazy? Instead of asking what happened to them, what's going on. And that's bringing that context into what we're seeing with behaviors.
Yeah, I oftentimes say we always ask the wrong question. We always ask what's wrong with you instead of what happened to you. That's the real question. The real question is what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. Because whatever is wrong with them is a result of what happened. So we need to start with the right question. What happened to you? And you'll be surprised at the results you get, as opposed to saying, what's wrong with you?
All right, we're going to move on to our next section. And this is some heavy stuff, the brain science and trauma. But what we do know, what the science and the research tells us, is that we can heal from trauma and we can change our behaviors. We all have that capacity. We literally can learn to rewire our brains, develop new pathways, and find new ways to respond to situations. Actions and thoughts, both positive and negative, that you repeat can form those new neural pathways. It's like anytime we've practiced something or we try to do something new or build a new habit, we can create new neural pathways. And if you practice this consistently, if you practice things such as meditating or exercising or learning how to play an instrument, you're likely to alter your brain to associate the relevant parts of its structure. So we're going to watch a little video. I'm an attorney, not a brain scientist. So we've got the brain scientist people who can tell us a little bit more about neuroplasticity and why it matters so much.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So let's connect a few things here. Those pathways that are the result of what we think, feel, and do. They're the most traveled pathways, those automated patterns, those automated responses that we talked about, those sort of what we know and oftentimes what we feel most comfortable with. We don't even think about it. We just travel that pathway and respond the way we do. But we can rewire those pathways, change our behaviors by changing what we think, what we feel, and what we do. Because when we can reframe our thoughts, we may feel differently and do differently. When we can understand our feelings, we may think differently and ultimately do something differently. And when we can activate our behaviors in a different way, maybe achieve a goal or do something a little differently, it may change the way we think and the way we feel. But we have to practice this a lot to carve these new pathways. This is the proof, though. This is the hope. This is the science behind it, that we know change is possible. No matter how hopeless we might feel on a given day, the science helps us understand that change is possible, and knowing this helps us find ways to engage differently with young people, to stay in this change process with them. And it helps us understand why sometimes young people don't seem so ready to change, why relapse happens often, and how we can sometimes show up a little bit differently. So I'm going to pass it back to JT.
So, as the graphic says, only a minority, usually less than 20% of the population at risk, is prepared to take action at any given time. And that's important because we need to understand like what it actually looks like for our young people, what it looks like for people to actually get to the place where they're ready to take action. Go to the next one. So when we consider the stages of change, right, and what the stages of change actually mean for the work that we do, a lot of times most programs are actually designed for young people that are at the action stage, right? That means that they're already acting differently. That means that when they show up at your door, they're ready to do something. The programs that we talk about or that we think about for this level of young people, for the ones that aren't ready to show up, they're at that pre-contemplation, which means no, which is why we relentlessly go after them, which is why our program is designed the way that it's designed, because we knew that it's going to be a challenge, or that we knew that we would have to go after young people and work with them for a while. So we start at no. And then at the time we get up to maybe and getting ready, but the whole goal is to be able to get them to the sustaining point. You look at it, the sustaining point is only more than 51%, right? We incorporate relapse into this process because we know that when you deal with a high-risk young person, we deal with a high-risk group of young people who are highly traumatized, relapse is only natural. Relapse is not only a substance abuse term, it's also a behavioral health term that we have to start considering when we're thinking about program design. How can we design our programs for everyone in these earlier stages, those who are going to relapse, those who are going to say no, those who are going to be stuck in that contemplation for a while, right? If we continue to design programs for those who are ready to move to the action phase, then we're going to keep seeing a lot of failures or a lot of disappointments when it comes to the highest risk population who just aren't ready to show up that way. So when you think about traditional versus stage-based programming, traditional program is driven by the participant. Stage-based program is driven by the worker, right? When you think about traditional programming driven by participant, I'm sorry, Betsy, I'm having the same problem with the words on the left-hand side again. My apologies. The next one is what? The enrollment?
Well, you have enrollment driven by the participant.
The engagement.
Yep. Next one is engagement, also driven by the participant with the stage-based program.
The worker.
Mm-hmm. And then we have programming driven by fixed schedules.
Yep. So the content should be developed.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where it also makes a huge importance. Driven by content. Remember, your program should be designed for where your young people are. Again, the reason why we designed our CBT the way that we designed it is because we tried houses of healing. We tried thinking for change. They were to advance for our young people because you have to read at the 9th grade level. You had to do homework. The lessons had to be taught sequentially. That didn't work for our population. So we had to think about how we did it to make it work for our population. It should be driven by the individual needs and readiness, right? It should be driven by the really focusing on what the delivery times are. Not place dependent, and deliver intentionally through contacts. So we think about how many times we see our young people, how we're able to actually deliver this to them. And then outcomes, time dependent. Did they meet it or did they not meet it? We're a 4-year program. We're getting ready to reduce to 3 years because we realized that the 4-year was just an extra year of us really just monitoring the young person more than we really needed to. So we cut down to 3, realized that we get 2 years intensive, and then we get a year to really get them on their way and off to doing something else. Or doing something different. So that's kind of how we built our program, but based on thinking about it this way. So when we think about cognitive behavioral theory, this is the design of what we do, right? Each situation affects what we think, what we feel in our bodies, and what we do in response. The idea is that we want people to understand, we're teaching cognitive behavior theory again, which is our CBT. We want people to understand the relationship between their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions, and understand that there is a relationship, but they can be disrupted at any one of those points to help you be able to do something different when you're stuck. So a lot of times we get stuck between what we think, what we feel, and then what we're doing. And that's what we call an unhelpful think, feel, do cycle. So the ultimate goal really is to be able to help young people identify these think, feel, do cycles, understand where there's an opening in these cycles by teaching them skills to help them get unstuck. The CBT skills are the 7 skills that we teach young people to help address when they get stuck in these think, feel, do cycles. And we hope that over time, with repeated practice, we can help them disrupt those old patterns and be able to do something different.
So we're going to show you sort of an example of a think, feel, do cycle and what someone may be thinking, feeling, and doing. CBT is really one of the most research-based interventions in our country to help people change their behaviors. So identifying where, we can identify our own cycles and how we help young people identify their own helpful cycle, their own unhelpful cycles is a great place to start. So let's take this situation. This is a young person getting called out on social media, and I'll play this for us.
And I could narrate it as we go through, right? So this is really about thinking about, I get called out on social media. What's the first thing? Man, ain't nobody going to disrespect me. So I'm enraged. I feel disrespected. So I start getting loud and making comments, and I'm thinking that's effed up. So now I'm anxious and I'm stressed. Now I'm determined. Man, I got to do what I got to do because they're not going to play with me like that. I'm not no sucker. I'm not soft. So what do? I drive across town with a gun and shoot up the block. Right? They were on live. I know where they at. Now I'm going to go across town and get them. But the idea is to think about what if we could have disrupted that between that at first thought, no one's ever going to disrespect me like that, and the feeling of feeling enraged or disrespected. What if we could have stopped that thought and helped reframe that and help them think about this situation a different way? Right? That's the idea, is that we have to stop it somewhere along this and really be able to help them rewind and think about how could I process this a little bit differently? Because everything you're saying about the situation may be true. But if you go shoot up that block, is that going to be the most helpful thing for you, bro? You said you value your freedom. You said you want to be here for your kids. If you go blow that block up, you're going to jail. All right? So really helping them consider those decisions and why.
So this is just an example of how, if we can slow everything down, we can help young people see the possibility of doing something different. And with Rewire CBT and how we support behavior changes, first we have to identify those cycles. One, we have to be able to identify when we're in a cycle as a practitioner or frontline worker, but we have to help young people identify their cycles so that they can slow it down. They can stop it just enough. We might just need a few seconds to be able to disrupt that cycle, to use a skill and see the possibility of doing something different. This allows us to heal, to sort of fix unhelpful patterns of behavior and create new pathways that move us towards safety and actually having more choices, that we're not just stuck with that one automated response. We actually have a lot more choices, but we got to slow things down enough so we can see them and see the possibility of them. Rewire CBT, sort of what makes us different, and sort of the strategy around using CBT is that Rewire CBT is 7 core life-saving skills that are meant to be taught and practiced and applied like anywhere you're at. We want to create an environment where every contact with a young person is an opportunity to teach, apply, and practice a skill. And we want to make it accessible. This is for frontline staff to be able to use with young people. Our frontline staff have the most contact with young people. They are there in the situations. And if they have the tools that help young people slow those cycles down and use a skill, then those possibilities to do something different are going to become way more apparent. Our skills are short, simple, flexible. They're not meant to be taught in one before the other. You want to use the skill that most matches the situation that you're in, that will actually help that young person disrupt a cycle that may be really unsafe or unhelpful. So you can sort of see the model here, and I'll go through this relatively quickly. The model is really based around that think, feel, do cycle and understanding how our thoughts, feelings, and actions all relate to each other, but also sometimes what's driving. Is it our thoughts? Is it our feelings? Is it our actions that are keeping us spinning in that unhelpful or unsafe cycle? So when we slow them down, these are the skills that we teach practitioners to teach young people so that they can use. The first skill is be present. It's really about focusing on the here and now, not what happened yesterday, not what might happen tomorrow, but really what's right in front of us in this moment. It's taking that 5-second pause to slow it down and hyper focus on what's happening right here. And then we have label your feelings, which is our emotional regulation skills, really to build up that vocabulary of your feelings and your emotions. Being able to build more control, not over what you're feeling. Your feelings are going to come in. They're going to be what they are. But when we can name them and when we have more words for our feelings, it may make us have a little bit more control over what we think and ultimately what we do. And then we have our cognitive flexibility skills, flex your thinking. You all right now listening to this webinar have thousands of thoughts going through your head, right? And I might shock you, but not all those thoughts are true and not all those thoughts are helpful. So when you have those extreme thoughts, they'll never finish up this webinar. I'll never be able to get a job. I'll never finish probation. I'll never be able to do this entire program. I'm always getting targeted by, my teachers at school. When we hear that extreme language, we can help young people start to identify, is that thought helpful? Is that thought true? And if it's not, then how do we reframe it so that maybe we feel a little differently and we do differently? Solve it is what you see up there. Solve it is how we take small steps to solve those problems that we're in control over. How do we take it slowly so that we can feel and do something a little differently? And then we have our behavior activation skills, which are really about sort of what we're doing if our sort of actions are driving our cycles. Act on your values is really about aligning our behaviors with what is most important to us rather than our emotions. Stick with it is building up the tolerance to do uncomfortable things. And when young people are system involved, pretty much everything we're asking them to do is uncomfortable. And they are geared. They're scanning for threats and their brain is telling them, do not do the uncomfortable thing. So how do we help them build up tolerance over time to do those uncomfortable things so that when they do them, they might realize they think differently and feel differently about the situation? And then move it is straight out of the depression literature. How do we help young people do something when they don't want to do anything at all? How do we help get them off the couch and get to school? How do we just charge their batteries up enough to do the first thing so then they do the next thing and then the next thing and ultimately reach their goal? Because we know when you start moving it, when you start charging that battery up, you may feel differently and then think differently. So we've got our last check for understanding here. This is just that reminder that we can heal and we can change by changing what we think, what we feel, and what we do. And it doesn't happen overnight. Don't we all wish it would? Some of those things, and even in our own lives, we wish we could change our behaviors immediately, but it takes time. It takes practice, and we have to remember that we have to prepare for that relapse because it is part of the change process. Our goals are to mitigate the severity and the frequency of the relapse, but we've got to plan for it and be prepared to stick with young people as they continue through that change practice. I'm going to pause for just a minute to see if any questions are in the comment or in the chat box. So if you have any questions about this last part, please feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll try to answer them. I like this comment. Yes, things are expected to be working like an on and off switch when it's more of a journey. And sometimes, we can give ourselves sort of that space and grace, as practitioners understand, we may be on a journey and it can be really hard, to sort of control our own automated responses and give young people that space and grace. All right, I'm going to pass it over to JT to introduce this video of our young people.
Yeah, no, just a video from my young people from Baltimore where we just asked them, what their relationship to CBT was, and it's just interesting to see what some of their responses were. So this is just a intro into what they think.
I'm not used to having people around. Period. You feel me? That'll help you out and not want anything back from the help. You feel what I'm saying? Or either just be there for you normally, every day, just to check on you. I didn't like it because I wasn't used to it. I think CBT is really how can I put this? It's a mind thing for us. You feel what I'm saying? It really make us think more. You know what I mean? And it is helping us get back to the level where we want to be.
They gotta let you know what the CBT stand for. They gotta let you know the meaning. It's just not something that they can throw at you and say, go home and read this paper and it's gonna be all right. No, it ain't like that. It take for you to get fired at a work job to find out that there's a lot in you to tell you that you can't get rehired. It's all in yourself.
The first time, being honest, I for what? For what? What are you trying to implement these skills in me for? I know how to deal with certain things. I didn't see a use for them. It definitely changed. Now when I look at it, it's something I actually do. Just certain skills I know really work when you make them work. So, and then CBT was another thing, just them knocking on the door. You couldn't be with somebody and not hear about CBT. That was the Bible to Roca.
It was the Bible to Roca, right? The first young man, R.I.P. May God rest his soul. First young man on the video has passed away a couple of months ago. Y'all murdered. The last young man on the video now works for us as a youth worker. He's been with us for almost 2 years now. We hired him on his graduation day because he has showed the level of knowledge in CBT that we thought would be great to grab him while we had him and help support him and help push his change forward even further by allowing him to work with the young people closest to his age group and his friends and his peer group. And, you know, he got shot. He got shot about 6 months ago and was in critical condition in the hospital. And when I went to see him, one of the first things he said to me was like, all my years running the streets doing dirt, I ain't never get hit. The minute I changed my life and started doing the right thing, not only do I get hit, but my cousin get killed. You know, his cousin was with him when he got shot. His cousin got killed. He got shot. He said, not only do I get hit up, but my cousin get killed. You know what I mean? But he said, Mr. JT, is not even about revenge. He was like, man, I'm thinking about how I can get out this bed and go help them kids. You know what I mean? Turns out, I think the boys were like 12 and 13-year-old brothers who actually were, you know, identified as his shooters. You know, so, I mean, you know, it was amazing to see, even through his traumatic experience, his mind shift and really wanting to really say, I'm not even angry. He was like, you know what? I could have this hospital filled up. Them two little boys could be dead right now. I was like, yeah, I know that. He's like, that's not even what I'm on. He was like, I'm more anxious to get back out there and help him to be like, man, what's wrong? Like, what's going on? Because he's like, I remember when I used to be that. And he's not far from that. He's only 20-something. So just examples of what young people, you know, can happen when you really support them.
So we're going to jump in and just go over a few. Oh, you want to go, JT? We'll just go over a few of our engagements that we're doing some work in California with some amazing people. And so generally when we work with a locality, we do some training and coaching. We really work to implement Rewire CBT so as an intentional part of your work. And then we do a lot of evaluation and learning just to see how people are absorbing Rewire CBT, how they're using it, and how it is equipping them to lean into their work. And then also we have strategies for creating sustainability around the utilization of Rewire CBT into the work. So I'm going to first introduce Jenny Romero. Jenny oversees the school violence intervention and prevention strategy as the violence prevention program manager for the city of Oakland. And prior to her roles in the Department of Violence Prevention, she worked in strategic planning, intervention programs, and direct service to populations at high risk for violence. And JT and I have had the privilege of working with Jenny in the city of Oakland. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Jenny, to talk a little bit about your engagement with the Institute and how you all are using Rewire CBT in your work.
Awesome. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, JT. Hi, everyone. Hi from Oakland. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the program, just give you a quick overview. So in response to the rise of violence in Oakland, the call for alternatives to law enforcement in both schools and the broader community, the DVP, the Department of Violence Prevention, developed the School Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. So this includes really strong collaboration between Oakland Unified School District, the city, the Department of Violence Prevention, and our community-based organizations to tackle these intractable social issues of youth violence. So our team is composed of a violence interrupter, a life coach, a gender-based violence specialist, and a restorative justice coordinator. These teams are assigned to specific schools, and they all collaborate with each other. As we know, violence can move from campus to campus and into the neighborhoods. So Roca has been training our teams within the department, the life coaches, and also the life coaches that are out in the schools. They've been using the think, feel, do cycles. They're understanding the survival brain. I think what Roca does, they're able to mindfully teach our teams and become aware of the youth brain development, survival brain. This brings awareness of why youth show up the way they do, and it allows our teams to meet them where they're at. Like JT was saying, some youth come with a lot of trauma. Some youth are not ready to accept help. And again, in Oakland, we have a relentless pursuit where we keep going after them, even if they say no multiple times. I think a lot of times people are like, well, we can't want it more than they do. Yes, we do want it more than they do, and we teach them to be able to want it as well. That's kind of our goal. So we work really hard in that relentless pursuit, going after our youth that, they don't trust adults anymore. They don't trust the system. Many people and systems have failed them. So being able to get trained and go into the school settings brings a lot of awareness, and it can bring up trauma and triggers for our team as well. But being able to become aware of your traumas and triggers allows folks to not only learn what they need to work on for their healing process, but they're also able to voice it to other team members so that they can kind of like tag each other in or out. If an adult is triggered, has is getting a big response in their body, they're able to go to another caring adult that could step in while they get themselves mentally or physically ready. So a lot of these tools they're using on themselves, but they're also using on the students, and they're able to also identify at schools which adults kind of like need this training as well. A lot of teachers and other school staff sometimes they'll have a bad day, but sometimes they haven't worked through their own triggers and trauma. And we will see that being taken out on students for minor incidents, like, oh, someone was just not sitting in the seat, in their assigned seat, and now they're kicked out of class. And so our team is able to not only de-escalate situations using these tools, but also realize and become aware that there's another adult that needs to work on, their own trauma, and is able to get that student into a safe space where they're able to self-regulate and, express their emotions and get out of that survival brain. And then kind of figure out what the root cause of things are to best provide support services. Another thing, some outcomes that we've been seeing is that as our team learns, they are practicing the think, feel, do with their own personal lives, with their families. They're setting boundaries, healthy boundaries. And some of them are sharing with their caseloads, their students, what that looks like for them. And students are able to take those examples and, get the language to be able to set healthy boundaries for themselves. And just start practicing that think, feel, do cycle. Again, like JT says, it's a lot of practice. This does not happen overnight. Our students didn't get into the situations that they're in overnight. So it kind of takes a while to get out of that environment as well. Another outcome that we are seeing is the advocacy. A lot of advocacy work for our young people in being able to voice what they need. And that only happens because our team has created trusting relationships, right? So they have been able to create that safe space for students and work towards trusting relationships. that takes a while, especially with this most vulnerable population. You can't just create a relationship overnight either. You know, it's showing up consistently. They are on campus every single day, Monday through Friday during school hours. So being visible and accessible and consistent is the formula to be able to get a student to start building that trusting relationship with you. And they also create the wiggle room. I know JT, I'm not sure if he trained and touched upon the wiggle room, but he has for us. And wiggle room is so important for our young people in just creating empathy, right? Meeting them where they are. That wiggle room of how, and this is like, you have to create those boundaries for what that looks like for you. What does wiggle room look like for you? Each person might be different. Each situation might be different. But that is able to more humanize as well, right? Students, everyone, we make mistakes, and students need to know that even though they made a mistake, they can still come to you and you can talk about it, you know, really see how to best support them. But they know that making a mistake doesn't mean that they have ruined that relationship with you, that they have like disappointed you and all of that, right? So I think that wiggle room is really important for our young people as well. Like JT said, they can fall back into old patterns, and we do expect that to happen. We just are there to catch them where they end up falling and keep pushing them forward. And what else? I think that's mostly what our program looks like as we're using Roca. And again, you don't need a school violence intervention prevention team to be able to do this. Like, I feel like any adult, anyone working and engaging with young people should get this training to best understand. One of my favorite quotes is like, students, like, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that's when they're able to open up. That's when you have bigger influences in supporting them with their life goals and things like that. So yeah, I don't want to go for my time either, but if there are any questions, comments, insights, feel free to put those in the chat.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing. It's been such a privilege to work in Oakland with your teams and really sort of bring Rewire CBT and operationalize it in the work that you all are doing. I'm going to briefly this is just some of our outcomes when we work with a cohort and we do training. We want to see how they're absorbing that training, how it went over, what else do they need, are they using it? And then I'm quickly just going to talk about our San Francisco work. We've been working with JPD in San Francisco, training everyone in the juvenile hall, in their detention, as well as their secure track program, to use Rewire CBT as that sort of strategy to help young people build the skills they need to build and change their behavior over time. It's sort of baked into their behavior management and their behavior change systems in the facility, and then carrying that over into community. And we're training all probation, as well as we'll be training some of the community-based organizations, so we can create that culture of that shared language. And again, where every contact with a young person becomes an opportunity to teach, apply, and practice a skill. At Roca, we can see Rewire CBT have an impact. These are some sort of high-level outcomes that our young people have achieved, but most have known, over about 91% that were enrolled in the program for 24 months or longer. 91% have no new arrests, and 97% have no new incarcerations. You're going to get this slide deck, so I don't want to spend too much time going over these. But lastly, I will just say, look, in order to prevent and reduce violence, we have to understand the brain science. We have to understand the impact of trauma, and we have to know and believe and have the hope that change is possible, but realizing it takes time, and it takes practice. And we know CBT is a strategy and a tool to help disrupt unhelpful patterns and support behavior change. So I'm going quickly because I want to make sure we have enough time to share this last video of our young people in Baltimore, and then we'll turn it over to the webinar team. And here's our last video.
Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? While they party at home, they dine in the streets, yeah. Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? While they dine at home, they party in the streets, yeah.
Here it comes, straight from my heart to your eardrums. Hey, breath in my lungs, relentless outreach as if I'm talking to my son. But still got enough respect to listen to him. Opportunity for me to learn something. One of the 5 P's like stop recidivism. Think on it, act on it, only way to move something. Think outside the box, so don't ever try to prove nothing.
Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? While they party at home, they dine in the streets, yeah. Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? While they dine at home, they party in the streets, yeah.
I don't got a lot to say, won't take it too far. Iron sharp as iron when you work, not your head hard. 10 toes, chin up, keep your face card. If I trust you, then it's never cause you're word bond. Cause if I trust you, I'ma ride till the wheels gone. Real, recognize real, you real familiar. They told you on the other side the grass is greener, but they won't tell you how to be the same achiever. Doggy dog, if you don't work, then you don't eat. CBT take me from weak to elite. I bet my bottom dollar on me. I got the tools I need to succeed. Think with it, be present, label all of my feelings, flex my thinking, act on values, moving when you stuck, only way to solve it. Show up every day cause you know Roca got the model.
Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? While they party at home, they dine in the streets, yeah. Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Tribute? Or is it just me? While they dine at home, they party in the streets, yeah.
A child is born with no state of mind. 8 minutes on the news, watch the child die. He grew up in the ghetto, living second rate, and his eyes did sing a life of deep hate. Turned stick up kid, but look what he done did. Got sent up for a 10-year bid. God was smiling on you, but he's frowning too. Cause God sees your path and what you go through. Smuggler, trapper, robber, gambler, turned all the pages. This is the last chapter, used and abused. Left for dead to one day while sitting alone in your cell. It was plain to see your life was lost. You got cold and your body rocked back and forth. Now your eyes sing the sad, sad song of how you lived so fast and died so young.
Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? While they party at home, they dine in the streets, yeah. Do you really care what's going on out there? And are you aware? Or is it just me? Home, they party in the streets, yeah.